The phone buzzed, and Jack's heart sank as he read the text. "I don't think he'll ever find out." The words shattered everything. His hand trembled as he set the phone down, his mind racing. Was Emma capable of betraying him? Everything felt like a lie now. He couldn't ignore the suspicion gnawing at him. The silence between them grew heavy with the truth he wasn't ready to confront. He had to know the truth, no matter the cost. Jack couldn't look away from Emma. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. The lie he had just discovered seemed like a small thing, just a message, a few words. But it wasn't small. It was a thread, and if pulled, it could unravel everything. Emma, sitting across from him, seemed unaffected. Her posture was stiff, and she avoided his gaze. But she wasn't trembling, wasn't apologizing. Jack knew her well enough to see the subtle signs of avoidance. He tried to ask, but his throat went dry. "Who's the message from?" He managed to whisper, his voice barely above a murmur. She didn't answer immediately, her lips pressing together in a thin line. The silence felt suffocating. He waited for her response, each passing second like an eternity. She finally spoke, but the words didn't match the look in her eyes. "Just a friend," she said. But Jack didn't buy it. He knew her too well, and something in her voice sounded off. There was a flicker of guilt in her eyes, and for the first time Jack felt the gnawing certainty that something was terribly wrong. Jack's heart was pounding. "Just a friend," he repeated, disbelief lacing his voice. He couldn't ignore the growing sense of something darker beneath the surface. He had always trusted Emma, but now that trust felt fragile. His mind flashed to every moment in their relationship, her late nights at work, the odd behavior she'd brushed off, the fleeting glances at her phone when he wasn't looking. Was it all building up to this? His gut told him that this wasn't the whole truth, but he couldn't bring himself to push further. What if he was wrong? What if he was seeing things that weren't there? Emma still hadn't met his eyes, and the silence between them felt more deafening by the second. He tried to steady himself, focusing on her words. "Who is this friend?" he pressed, his voice steady but sharp. The way she fidgeted with her hands, the way she refused to look up, it all spoke louder than anything she could say. Jack knew she was hiding something. He just didn't know what it was. The unease in the air thickened, and Jack wondered how much longer he could stand pretending everything was fine. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. Jack felt his frustration building. He didn't want to keep pressing her, but he couldn't let this go. "I deserve more than this," he muttered under his breath. Emma's silence was more telling than any words could be. His mind raced as he thought about all the times she had reassured him everything was fine. Was this the truth he had been avoiding, or was it something even worse? Jack moved closer to her, his voice low but filled with a sense of urgency. "I need to know. If there's something going on, I need you to be honest with me." His eyes locked onto hers, desperate for some sign of truth, but Emma only shook her head, still unwilling to look at him directly. The walls between them felt like they were closing in, and Jack's chest tightened with every passing second. Emma's silence was a defense, a shield she had built around herself, and Jack had no idea how to break it down. The coldness in the room matched the growing frost in his heart. How long had she been hiding this? How many lies had they shared in the name of love? His world seemed to collapse around him as he tried to hold on to something, anything that felt real. Emma's voice broke the silence, soft but resolute. "It's nothing, Jack. I swear," she said, but her words felt empty, hollow. Jack stared at her, his pulse racing as he tried to make sense of it all. Was this really just nothing? Could she be telling the truth? Or was this just another lie? The weight of everything that had happened, every little clue that had been tucked away in the back of his mind, was suddenly unbearable. The text, the late nights, the avoidance, nothing added up. Jack wanted to believe her, He wanted to ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach, the feeling that told him she was lying. But the more he thought about it, the more certain he became that something was wrong. "You can't keep lying to me, Emma." Jack's voice was firm, but beneath it, there was a quiet sadness. He had to know the truth. The room felt colder, the air thicker, as if time itself had frozen in the space between them. Emma remained silent, her eyes still fixed on the ground, and Jack felt the world slip further away from him. The reality of the situation was too painful to face, but he couldn't back down. He needed answers, no matter how much it hurt. The days after the confrontation felt like an endless blur for Jack. He couldn't stop thinking about the text, the lie Emma had told him. Was she hiding something deeper? The unease had taken root in him, growing with every passing moment. Jack tried to keep his mind off it, but everywhere he turned, there were signs he couldn't ignore. He noticed the small things: Emma's late nights, the quick glances at her phone, and her sudden disinterest in their usual conversations. He had once trusted her completely, but now every word she spoke seemed laced with doubt. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being kept in the dark, that something was slipping away. It wasn't just the text anymore. It was the atmosphere between them. What had been a warm, comforting relationship now felt cold and distant. His stomach churned at the thought that Emma had been hiding something from him for so long. He had always prided himself on being a good judge of character, but this was different. His trust in her was shaken, and with each passing day, he found it harder to pretend everything was normal. Jack's suspicions were starting to mount. He had to find answers. One evening, as he walked into the living room, he saw Emma once again glued to her phone, her expression unreadable. He noticed the small shift in her body language. She immediately closed the screen when he entered. Jack's heart raced as he forced himself to stay calm. "Who are you texting?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Emma looked up at him, her face momentarily frozen, before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Just a friend," she replied. But the hesitation in her voice was unmistakable. Jack's gut told him that something wasn't right, but he didn't want to push too hard. He had already seen the cracks in their relationship, and each new lie felt like another layer of their connection being torn apart. The tension was unbearable, and Jack knew he couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. He needed to know what Emma was hiding, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to face the truth. Jack could feel the tension in the room. He didn't know how to bridge the gap between them anymore. The more he tried to confront Emma, the more she withdrew. There was no room for honest conversation, only surface-level pleasantries that made everything feel even more suffocating. Late one night, Jack sat alone, replaying their conversation in his head. His thoughts spiraled. What was the truth? The text, the secretive phone calls. Could all of it be explained away by just a friend? The doubt gnawed at him like a constant ache, one he couldn't ignore. The silence between him and Emma was growing, and it was killing him. He missed the closeness they once shared, but now every touch felt distant, every smile felt forced. Jack had spent so much time trying to convince himself that everything would be okay, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. He had to face what was happening. He had to confront Emma and get to the bottom of the lies, no matter what it took. The breaking point came when Jack stumbled upon another detail he couldn't ignore. One evening, as he casually glanced at Emma's phone, he saw an unfamiliar name in her recent messages. His heart sank as he read the conversation, the words like a punch to his stomach. The text was casual, but it was clear. This wasn't just a friend. It was someone Emma had been intimate with. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, his mind reeling. How long had this been going on? Jack felt his world crash down around him as he processed the betrayal. He couldn't breathe. He had been living in a lie for so long, and now the truth was staring him in the face. Jack's hands shook as he set the phone down, trying to steady his breathing. This was the moment he had been dreading. The moment where he couldn't pretend anymore. The truth was undeniable, and now Jack had to face it head-on. Jack confronted Emma that night, his emotions spilling over in a way he couldn't control. "Who is he?" Jack demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Emma's face went pale, her eyes darting away from his. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jack couldn't believe how far she had gone to hide this from him. "I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to admit it," Jack said, his voice breaking. Emma remained silent, her eyes now filled with guilt. Jack's anger and hurt were palpable, and he couldn't contain the overwhelming feeling that everything they had built together was now shattered beyond repair. "Why?" he whispered, his voice thick with pain. Emma finally met his gaze, but there were no words that could undo the damage. Jack had known deep down, but seeing it confirmed in black and white hurt more than he could ever imagine. The silence between them felt like an abyss, and Jack couldn't find a way to bridge the gap that had formed between them. Days passed, but Jack couldn't shake the image of the message he had read on Emma's phone. His mind replayed the scene over and over, each time the sting of betrayal cutting deeper. The anger was there, but it was mixed with a growing sense of helplessness. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of lies, each one more suffocating than the last. Every glance Emma cast his way only made him more certain that something was wrong. She had become an expert at deflecting his questions, at avoiding eye contact when the tension in the room became too thick. Jack couldn't even look at her without feeling a wave of distrust wash over him. It had all come to a head one evening when he saw her texting again, her face flushed with an emotion Jack couldn't quite place. This time he couldn't stay silent. He approached her cautiously, trying to steady his breathing. "Who is he, Emma?" he asked, his voice firm but shaking. "Tell me the truth. I need to know who he is." Her eyes flickered nervously, and for a moment Jack saw a vulnerability in her that she had kept hidden. That brief glance told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a friend. Jack's hands tightened into fists. He couldn't ignore it anymore. "You owe me the truth," he added, his voice low but filled with a raw intensity. Emma's hesitation only fueled Jack's anger. She shifted, uncomfortably, her lips pressed tightly together, as if she was trying to keep something inside. Jack couldn't stand the silence any longer. "You can't keep lying to me, Emma. I know there's more." The words hung in the air, cutting through the fragile calm. Emma's fingers trembled as she typed something on her phone, but she didn't look up at Jack. Her refusal to face him head-on only made Jack feel more abandoned. Was this how far they had come? Was their relationship nothing more than a facade, built on lies and secrets? His voice softened, the raw edge of emotion still present. "I loved you, Emma. I trusted you." His words seemed to echo in the room, and for the first time, Emma finally looked up. The guilt in her eyes was unmistakable, and Jack could see the pain she was trying to hide. But it wasn't enough. "Why can't you just tell me the truth?" Jack asked, his voice cracking as the weight of the moment bore down on him. The room felt colder now, filled with an uncomfortable silence, as if both of them were waiting for something that neither was prepared for. Emma's silence was the loudest thing in the room. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Jack could feel the tension mounting. His heart was racing, but there was a strange stillness to the moment. He wanted to scream, to force her to confess, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. The raw pain of it all was suffocating him. And yet he still felt an unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, Emma would tell him the truth. Her lips parted again, and Jack's breath caught in his chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but those two words were like a knife. They weren't enough. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Emma," Jack replied, his voice tight with emotion. "I need the truth." The silence between them seemed to stretch on forever. Jack's mind was spiraling, Could this really be happening? Had he misread everything? His trust in her was shattered, but a small part of him wanted to believe there was still something left worth saving. Emma looked up finally, her eyes filled with tears, and Jack knew then that whatever truth she was about to reveal would change everything. Emma finally broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. "I was scared," she confessed, her eyes searching Jack's face for some sort of understanding. "I didn't know how to tell you." Jack stood frozen, the weight of her words hitting him like a freight train. For a moment he didn't know what to say. He had prepared himself for this moment. But hearing her speak the truth, even in such a quiet and painful way, sent a wave of emotions rushing through him. "You could have told me anything, Emma," Jack said, his voice low and filled with hurt. "We could have worked through it. But now I don't even know who you are anymore." He turned away, his heart pounding. Emma's voice reached him again, this time more urgent. "I never meant to hurt you, Jack. I never wanted this." But Jack could barely listen. The damage had already been done. The betrayal had left a scar deeper than he could have ever imagined. He wanted to walk away, to escape the suffocating reality of it all, but he was trapped by the truth they now shared. Jack's thoughts were a storm. He had always believed in the strength of their relationship, but now he wasn't sure if he could ever trust Emma again. The weight of the betrayal hung over him, suffocating him with each passing second. He had so many questions, but none of them seemed important anymore. What mattered now was whether he could ever look at her the same way again. Could he forgive her? Or had she crossed a line that was impossible to come back from? "I don't know if I can do this anymore," Jack said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of despair and confusion. "I don't know if I can keep pretending like everything is okay." Emma's tears fell freely now, her sobs echoing in the silence between them. "Jack, please," she whispered. But Jack shook his head. "I don't know if I can love you the way I did," he admitted, the truth of the words cutting him deep. Emma looked at him with a pained expression, but Jack could only walk away, his heart shattered and his mind lost in the sea of broken promises. Jack felt the world crumble around him. He had never imagined a day would come when his entire life, his relationship with Emma, would unravel in front of him like this. It was surreal, like watching a nightmare unfold in real time. Days passed, and Jack found himself replaying every moment he had spent with her, analyzing it for signs of the betrayal he had never expected. But there were no signs, only the shocking revelation that Emma's affair had been hidden so well, so completely. Jack couldn't even bring himself to confront her about the details. The mere thought of it was unbearable. Instead, he tried to focus on something else, anything else. But his mind always circled back to the discovery. He had always been the one who asked the tough questions, the one who sought out the truth. But now the answers felt irrelevant. What did it matter who the other person was? What did it matter how long it had been going on? The damage was done, and the trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship was now shattered. Emma had crossed a line, and Jack didn't know if he could ever forgive her for it. He had spent so much of his life building a future with her, and now all of it felt like a lie. The following days felt like a blur of pain and confusion. Jack had tried to maintain normalcy, to push through the awkwardness between him and Emma, but nothing felt right anymore. Every word she said seemed empty, and every glance she gave him was filled with guilt. He couldn't escape the feeling that their life together had been built on a foundation of lies. Emma had been acting strange lately, avoiding eye contact, keeping her distance. Jack couldn't understand it. The woman he had trusted above all others had betrayed him in the most intimate way, and yet she still refused to admit the full truth. Whenever Jack asked her directly, she would simply evade, brushing him off with vague answers. "I'm sorry, Jack," she would say, but her apologies felt hollow. They weren't enough. The silence between them had become unbearable. Jack couldn't continue pretending that everything was okay, but he also couldn't bring himself to walk away from her. His love for her had been so deep, but now it was mixed with anger and hurt. He needed answers, and yet every conversation ended with more questions. The truth was right there, but Emma still refused to give it to him. Jack had enough. He couldn't live in this emotional limbo anymore. "I need to know everything," Jack finally said one evening. His voice was firm, though the words were hard to say. "I can't keep living like this, Emma." Emma looked up, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Jack had never seen her so vulnerable, and for a moment he felt a flicker of sympathy. But it was fleeting. He had to know. "Who is he?" Jack pressed, his voice shaking with the weight of the question. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. The silence hung in the air like a thick fog. Jack's patience was running thin. He had given her chance after chance to be honest, but each time she had chosen to hide the truth. "I can't do this anymore, Emma," Jack said, his voice breaking. "If you love me at all, you'll tell me the truth." But Emma still remained silent, unable or unwilling to provide the answers he needed. Jack's heart raced and his mind spiraled. How could he still want to fix something that was so broken? How could he even think of rebuilding trust with someone who had hurt him so deeply? Emma finally spoke, but her words felt like a betrayal in themselves. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, barely able to make eye contact. "I didn't know how to stop. I never meant for this to happen." Jack stood frozen, unable to process what she had just said. How could she say that she never meant to hurt him when she had done just that? Every word she spoke only dug the knife in deeper. "So what now?" Jack asked, his voice low and bitter. "Do you think this apology will fix everything? That we can just go back to the way things were?" Emma shook her head, tears falling freely now. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I wish I could take it all back, but I can't." Jack looked at her, his mind spinning with thoughts of everything they had been through together. The life they had built. Gone. The trust they had shared. Destroyed. And now, all that was left were these apologies that felt like empty promises. Jack wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead, he simply walked away, his heart heavy with the realization that there was no going back. The next few days passed in a haze. Jack couldn't escape the feeling of betrayal that lingered in the pit of his stomach. He had tried to act normal, to pretend like he wasn't broken, but every time he looked at Emma, the pain resurfaced. They hadn't spoken much after their confrontation, but the silence was deafening. Jack had always been a man of action, but now he felt paralyzed. He couldn't decide what to do next. Should he stay and try to rebuild what they had? Could he ever trust her again? Or was it time to walk away, to free himself from the toxic grip of the betrayal? The answers didn't come easily. Jack knew he was at a crossroads, but no matter which direction he chose, there would be consequences. The weight of the decision was unbearable, and he wished he could escape it. But deep down, he knew there was no escaping the truth. The only thing he could do now was face it. He could either move forward or leave it all behind. Jack had been walking around in a daze for days, unable to find any peace in the silence that had enveloped their home. He couldn't escape the image of Emma's face, tear-streaked and full of regret. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, heard her voice. His mind raced, torn between the desire to fix things and the growing realization that their relationship might be irreparably broken. He had once believed in them, believed in her, but the truth hung between them like an impenetrable wall. Jack had tried to move on, tried to pretend everything was fine, but he couldn't shake the emptiness he felt every time they spoke. Emma's apologies, though heartfelt, weren't enough. She had hurt him in ways that couldn't be undone. The love they shared felt tainted, as if it had been forever altered by the betrayal. Jack knew he needed to decide what came next, but the thought of losing Emma forever was unbearable. He still loved her, but could love alone overcome the destruction of trust? "I can't keep doing this," he muttered to himself, the words falling flat in the empty room. He wasn't sure if they were directed at Emma or to himself, but the weight of the decision loomed over him like a heavy cloud. Emma had spent the past few days trying to reach Jack, trying to explain, but he was distant, cold even. She could feel the space between them widening with every moment. She knew she had lost him in a way that couldn't be fixed with words. They had always been able to talk, to communicate openly, but now that connection was gone. Each attempt she made to bridge the gap only seemed to push him further away. She watched him from across the room, his back turned to her, as if she wasn't even there. She had never seen him like this, so lost, so disconnected. His heart had once been an open book, but now it felt like a locked door she couldn't find the key to. "I'm sorry, Jack," she whispered to herself, but the words felt hollow, too late. She had caused this rift, and no amount of apologies would change the truth. Emma had crossed a line, and now she had to live with the consequences. The pain of watching Jack retreat further from her was almost more than she could bear. What could she do now? She had already lost him in so many ways, and yet she couldn't bring herself to let go. She reached out, her fingers brushing his shoulder gently, but he didn't turn around. Jack's frustration boiled over. "I don't know what you want me to say, Emma," he snapped, his voice sharp and filled with a raw edge. "What's left to fix?" Emma recoiled slightly at his tone, but Jack's words were like a dam breaking, the anger and hurt he had buried for so long finally surfacing. "You betrayed me. You destroyed everything," Jack continued, his chest heaving with emotion. The words felt like a release, but they didn't bring any relief. If anything, they only made the weight of the betrayal heavier. "I don't know how to move past this. I don't know if I can ever trust you again," he said, the last words leaving his mouth with a bitter finality. Emma stood there, unable to respond. Her heart ached hearing Jack's pain, but she knew she couldn't undo what had been done. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, but Jack didn't respond. The silence between them was deafening. Jack had always been the one to keep things together, to make them work. But now, he didn't know how to fix the broken pieces of their relationship. They were both stuck in the past, unable to move forward, but unwilling to let go. The argument had reached a point of no return. Jack couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. "Maybe we need space," he said finally, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "I don't know how to fix this, and I don't think I can do it with you in the same room." Emma's eyes widened with shock, her breath catching in her throat. "You're asking for space?" she whispered, as if the concept itself was foreign. "Jack, please don't do this." But Jack only shook his head. "I need to figure out who I am without you, Emma. I need time to think." The pain in Emma's eyes was almost too much to bear, but Jack had reached his breaking point. He couldn't keep living in this limbo. He needed to make a decision, and that meant stepping away from her, even if it broke his heart. Emma opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She had no response, because deep down, she knew he was right. She had hurt him beyond repair. Jack turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing there, tears welling up in her eyes as she watched him leave, unsure if he would ever come back. Jack had left, but Emma couldn't move. The silence in the room was suffocating. She stood frozen, her body shaking, as she processed what had just happened. She had been given a chance to fix everything, and now it felt like that chance had slipped through her fingers. She didn't know what was worse, the betrayal or the possibility of losing Jack for good. She had never imagined a future without him, but now that was the only future she could see. She sank to the couch, her sobs escaping in quiet waves. "What have I done?" she whispered through her tears. Jack had been her everything, and now she wasn't sure if she had any right to ask for his forgiveness. The weight of her actions pressed down on her like a ton of bricks. She had no answers, only questions, and a heart full of regret. The emptiness she felt now was a direct consequence of her own choices. She could only wait for a moment when Jack might come back, or wait for the inevitable end to come. But for now, all she could do was sit in the silence and wonder if they would ever be able to heal. Days turned into weeks, and Jack's heart was still in turmoil. The space he had taken from Emma had been the hardest thing he had ever done. He had spent so many nights alone, trying to process the pain of everything that had happened. The silence between them had become deafening, and yet Jack couldn't shake the feeling that it was necessary. Emma had reached out, texted him, tried to apologize over and over, but Jack still wasn't ready to face her. He needed time. Time to heal. Time to regain his sense of self. The betrayal had fractured everything he had believed in, and now he found himself questioning everything. Could he forgive Emma? Could they ever go back to what they were? Was the pain of the past something he could bury in order to build a future? He didn't know. Jack spent countless hours weighing the possibilities, but in the end, it all came back to trust. It was broken, and Jack wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. But something inside him, the same part of him that had always believed in second chances, whispered that maybe, just maybe, forgiveness was possible. He wasn't ready to make that decision yet, but the thought lingered, like a flicker of hope in the dark. Emma's heart had been in pieces for weeks. Jack hadn't responded to any of her messages. She had left him voicemails, sent him texts, but nothing. The silence was like a loud scream in her ears. She spent her days replaying their last conversation over and over, trying to understand how things had gotten so bad. She had never meant for it to go this far. She had never imagined she could hurt Jack so deeply. But now she was facing the consequences of her actions, and it was breaking her apart. She had reached out to everyone she knew for advice, for comfort, but no one could tell her how to fix this. The only person who could fix this was Jack, and he was silent. Emma stood in the kitchen late one night, looking out the window, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, tears falling. She missed him more than she thought possible, but she knew she couldn't undo what had been done. All she could do now was wait, hope, and perhaps somewhere in the distance, find a way to rebuild the trust they had once shared. Jack finally responded, but his message was short, almost cold. He had spent so many nights contemplating the future. What would happen if he forgave Emma? Or what would happen if he walked away? He didn't want to give her false hope, but he also didn't want to sever the connection entirely. Jack understood that healing would take time. He knew that he couldn't rush through the emotions he was feeling, but at the same time, he was tired of carrying the weight of it alone. "We need to talk," his message read. It was simple, but it was a start. Emma's hands shook when she read the text. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The first crack in the wall that had separated them. But even as relief washed over her, she knew that the conversation that would follow wouldn't be easy. It wasn't about apologizing again. It was about coming to terms with everything that had happened. Emma sat down, taking a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had no idea where this conversation would lead, but she was willing to try. She had to try. For them. They met the following afternoon in the same cafe where Jack had sat alone days earlier. Emma arrived first, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap as she waited for Jack to show up. When he finally walked in, his face unreadable, Emma's heart skipped a beat. He looked different, more guarded, more distant. Jack sat down across from her, his eyes avoiding hers. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The silence was palpable, thick with everything they hadn't said. Finally, Jack cleared his throat, meeting her eyes for the first time in weeks. "I've been thinking," he began slowly, "and I can't pretend like nothing happened. But I also can't keep pushing you away. Emma's heart raced as she listened, her mind already racing ahead. "I don't know what the future holds," Jack continued, "but I need to know if you're willing to work through this. Are you willing to try?" Emma felt a surge of hope. This was what she had been waiting for, the chance to fix things. But as much as she wanted to say yes immediately, she knew it wouldn't be that simple. Rebuilding trust would take time, and both of them had a lot of healing to do. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes." The conversation wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Jack and Emma had spoken honestly about their feelings, their hurt, and their desires for the future. Jack wasn't sure what would come next, but something had shifted in the air. Emma was willing to work on herself, and Jack was willing to give her a chance, albeit a small one. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was progress. Jack wasn't ready to fully trust Emma again, but the first step was always the hardest. For Emma, this was the first time in weeks she felt like there was hope. She wasn't asking for instant forgiveness, she just wanted a chance to prove herself, to show Jack that she was truly sorry. It wasn't going to be easy, but they both knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges. The emotional scars of the past would take time to heal, but for the first time in a long while, they both felt like they could at least begin the process. Jack stands outside Emma's apartment, uncertain and filled with conflicting emotions. He knows he must face her, but isn't sure if he can forgive her. The decision to move forward or let go weighs heavily on him. Emma opens the door, and they stand in silence. The emotional distance is palpable, but the possibility of reconciliation lingers. They exchange a simple hi, unsure of how to begin the conversation. They sit down and Jack admits he's unsure if he can forgive her. Emma expresses regret, and they both confront the pain. Jack still struggles with trust, but they acknowledge the need to heal. Emma apologizes, and Jack admits he's not sure if he can trust her again. However, he's open to trying, showing a flicker of hope. The conversation is filled with pain, but also a possibility for change. Jack leaves, still uncertain, but with a sense of hope. They haven't reached resolution, but the door remains open for healing. Jack feels the possibility of a future together, uncertain but worth pursuing.